Right guys, welcome back, and now we will be looking at private and public variables. So first of all, let's remove this constructor we did last time and let's leave the rest as it is. So currently we have all our information, all our variables, our constructor and our method. And by the way, when I say method, I really mean function, because functions that are inside a class are called methods. And so all of them are now public. What does it mean? It means that when we have an object like this here, Ivan is an object of the class person, and you can also say that Ivan is an instance of the class person. Whenever we have an object, if you write like this Ivan dot, you see that we can access all of the variables, age, gender, name, and we also can access the constructor, and we can access print info. So everything is accessible from the outside, all right? Now, this is both good and bad. It is good in some cases, but in some cases, you do not want variables to be accessible from the outside. Mainly because, if you think about software development as a whole, and imagine if you have a huge program, a huge class, with many different internal variables that simply do not make sense to the outside world, that simply are weird, internal variables that make sense inside the class, but do not make any sense outside the class. So this is why we have this notion of private, and this is why we have private variables. And so let's just get practical, and I will show you. So let's declare some private variables like this. We have private, and let's declare the height as private, like this, int height. If I save this file and I go here and I try to access height, you see it is in red. It means that it is private. And if I try to set the height to, for example, 1000 and try to build and run, you see I get an issue here. Int person height is private, it says. Well, it is completely right. Because height is private, we cannot access it from the outside. We cannot change it from the outside. What we can do is that we can access it from the inside. So for example, in the constructor, we can set height to 1000, like this. And if I build and run, it all works fine. I can also from the inside output the height here. The height of the person is height, like this. Build and run. And you see from the inside, I'm able to access the height of the person is 1000. So all the methods inside here are able to interact with height. We're able to set height in the constructor, and we're able to read height in this method. Let's see what happens if I try to read height here. Reading height. And then let's try to print it here, Ivan that height. Build and run. You see it doesn't work because person height is private, so we cannot do this. You cannot even print it from the outside. And you might be wondering, Ivan, why do we even do it this way? Isn't it very tedious? Don't we just introduce a lot of headache right here? Well, no, this is actually how you should do all variables. All variables should be done in this fashion. So the reason is that, for example, let's say that height is public, like this. Now, from the outside, anyone can set height to whatever. For example, I can set height minus 600. This is ridiculous. You cannot have negative height, but we have no checks, we have no balances, we just expose the raw variable to the world. So the best practice in programming is to have all variables private. So in reality, all of them should be private. None of them should be accessible from the outside. And I will show you how to access. And let me first see if we can code generate some things here, because what we need is that we need to do so-called getters and setters. Yeah, whatever. Let's just do it by hand. So for example, if I want to set height, we should check so that the height is positive. So for example, I might have a method here called void set height and have an integer h as argument. And then here, for example, I can check if h is more than 0, then I can have height equal to h. I mean, else I can have that height is equal to 0. So for example, what I can do now is that I can have height that set height like this, and let's try to set it to 555. Set height like this, build and run, and you see the height of the person is 555. But if I try to set it to, for example, minus 9999, and I try to run it, you see that the height of the person is 0. So as you can see, I mean, this is kind of a easy example, but if you just imagine a complex application, you do not want to expose raw variables. All raw variables should be private, and then you should have methods, functions that expose them. So for example, we can have a function called int get height. So, and the only thing this function does is that it returns the height. It returns this private variable. And so in this fashion, we can now do like this: cout height is, and then you have Ivan that get height. Because this method get height, it is public. However, because it is public, it is inside of the class, it's able to interact with private variables. And so in this way, we can actually give this variable a way to interact with the outside world. So we have constructing object height is 1000, and this is because we set it to 1000 here. I mean, what I can do is that I can have Ivan that set height. We can have 300 like this, and then build and run, and now I have, I mean, object height is 300. So guys, I hope you understand the logic here. And for all these, you know, private variables, if we want to access them from the outside, we should create a getter. So this is called a getter, because the only thing it does is that it gets the variable. It just takes the private variable and exposes it to the real world. And this is the way to do it. I mean, you talk to any programmer, they will tell you this is the way you should do it. You should always have all the raw variables private, so that you have very, very specialized ways of setting them. You do not want to just have them open so that any programmer can just, you know, set the variable however they want. For example, setting the height to negative. You always want to check. You always want to have control over how the interaction between the internal state of your class and the outside world looks like. So I hope you learned. I hope you understand the difference between public and private, and I'll see you guys in the next video.